Let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone crave you, want you, even need you, but still keep their distance? That's what we're talking about today. The silence, the hesitation, the mystery. Now let's break this down because life isn't about sitting in confusion or chasing after answers you'll never get. Life is about clarity and understanding. First off, emotional walls. You see, some people walk around with bricks on their shoulders. They've built walls so high they can't even see over them anymore. These walls protect them. At least, that's what they think. But in truth, those walls also imprison them. They crave connection, but their fear of being vulnerable, that keeps them locked in. Now let's talk about fear of vulnerability. Vulnerability is strength, but not everybody knows that. They see it as a weakness, as something that exposes them to rejection, to judgment, to pain. A man might crave you like he craves water in the desert, but the fear of being hurt, that's the mirage he can't seem to walk past. And let's not forget ego. Oh yeah, that little voice that says, I don't need her to know how much I care. I'll be fine. Ego is a dangerous thing. It convinces people to stay silent when they should speak, to hold back when they should reach out. And you're left wondering what went wrong. But here's another thing, miscommunication. Sometimes we think we're speaking the same language, but really we're not even in the same dictionary. He might think his silence is protecting you. He might think it's better for you to not get involved with his mess. But to you, it feels like rejection. And that, my friends, is why clarity is so important in every relationship. Then there's the past, unhealed wounds, unresolved heartbreaks. These things stay with people. You might not see them, but they're there, lurking in the background. And those past experiences, they whisper doubts, fears, and insecurities into his ear every time he thinks about reaching out to you. So what do? You focus on patience and self-worth. Let me tell you this, your value isn't determined by someone else's actions. You are whole. You are enough with or without his attention. Don't let his silence make you question your worth. Don't chase after someone who doesn't have the courage to meet you halfway. Listen, people crave connection. It's human nature. But sometimes they don't know how to act on it. That's not your burden to carry. You keep your heart open, but you keep your standards high. Don't just wait for someone to figure out their issues. Keep living, keep growing, and trust that the right people, the ones who are ready, will meet you where you are. Emotional walls are barriers people build to protect themselves from pain, rejection, or vulnerability. While they might seem like a defense mechanism, these walls can often become a prison, isolating the person behind them from the very connections they deeply crave. Let's take a closer look at why these walls exist, how they manifest, and what they mean in the context of relationships. Why emotional walls exist. Emotional walls don't come from nowhere. They're built over time, usually as a result of past experiences. Someone who has been hurt before, whether through betrayal, loss, or rejection, might construct these walls as a way to prevent themselves from experiencing that same pain again. It's a form of self-preservation, a way to say, I won't let anyone hurt me like that again. For example, a man who was once in a loving relationship that ended in heartbreak might struggle to open himself up to love again. He may crave connection, but the memory of that pain becomes a warning signal. Don't get too close. Don't let anyone in. These walls become his shield, his armor against the unknown risks of emotional intimacy. How emotional walls manifest. People with emotional walls may show certain behaviors that make it difficult to connect with them on a deeper level. They might avoid deep conversations. They steer clear of topics that could make them feel vulnerable. Keep relationships surface level. They prefer light, casual interactions rather than allowing anyone to see their true selves. Display emotional detachment. They may seem distant even when they're physically present, as if they're holding back a part of themselves. Use humor or distractions as a defense. Instead of addressing serious emotions, they might deflect with jokes or change the subject. The interesting part is that these behaviors aren't always conscious. Often, people aren't even aware they're building walls. They think they're just being careful or taking things slow. But in reality, they're creating distance that prevents true intimacy. The duality of craving and fear. The paradox of emotional walls is this: while they're designed to protect, they also block out the very thing the person desires most. A man might crave love, companionship, and understanding, but feel paralyzed by the fear of what that connection might bring. Imagine standing on the edge of a pool on a hot day. You want to dive in, to feel the cool water, to swim freely, but you hesitate because you're afraid it'll be too cold or you'll sink instead of swim. Emotional walls create that same kind of hesitation in relationships. The person longs to dive in, but is afraid of the unknown, afraid of what might happen if they let go. Breaking down emotional walls. The truth is, emotional walls can only be brought down from the inside. No amount of external effort, whether through love, patience, or understanding, can force someone to lower their guard if they're not ready. They have to do the internal work to confront their fears and take the risk of vulnerability. However, there are ways to encourage someone to feel safe enough to begin that process. Consistency. Show them that you're not going anywhere, that you're a stable presence in their life. Patience. Understand that their walls weren't built overnight, and they won't come down quickly either. Open communication. Create a space where they feel heard and understood without judgment. Even so, it's crucial to remember that breaking down walls isn't your responsibility. You can support someone, but they have to do the heavy lifting themselves. The cost of emotional walls. While emotional walls might offer short-term protection, they come at a long-term cost. They can lead to loneliness, missed opportunities, and a life lived in fear rather than connection. Relationships require vulnerability, and without it, true intimacy is impossible. Emotional walls may protect someone from pain, but they also prevent them from experiencing joy, love, and the depth of human connection. To truly live and love, one must be willing to take risks, to let others in, and to trust that even if pain comes, it's a part of the journey that makes us stronger. Breaking down these walls takes courage, and courage, as they say, isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Fear of vulnerability is one of the most significant reasons people hold back from reaching out even when they deeply desire connection. Vulnerability requires a person to open up, to expose their emotions, and to let someone see their true self. For many, this is terrifying because it comes with risks, rejection, judgment, or being perceived as weak. Let's delve into why fear of vulnerability arises, how it impacts relationships, and what it takes to overcome it. Why fear of vulnerability exists. Fear of vulnerability doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's usually rooted in past experiences or internalized beliefs. Here are some common reasons why people develop this fear. Fear of rejection. When someone shares their true self, they risk not being accepted. Past experiences of rejection, whether from family, friends, or romantic partners, can reinforce the idea that opening up is dangerous. Fear of judgment. Vulnerability often means admitting flaws, insecurities, or mistakes. Many people fear that if they reveal their weaknesses, they'll be judged or seen as less than perfect. Cultural or social conditioning. In many societies, especially for men, vulnerability is often equated with weakness. People are taught to stay strong or not show emotions, creating a stigma around being open and honest about feelings. Previous trauma. Past experiences of betrayal or emotional harm can make vulnerability feel unsafe. If someone has been hurt after opening up in the past, they may avoid being vulnerable again to protect themselves. How fear of vulnerability manifests. When someone is afraid of being vulnerable, it shows up in their behavior. They may avoid deep emotional conversations. They steer conversations away from personal or emotional topics to keep their guard up, suppress their feelings. They may avoid expressing sadness, fear, or even love, fearing how others might react. Keep people at arm's length. They may limit emotional intimacy, even with people they care about deeply, to protect themselves from potential pain. Put on a facade. They may present a version of themselves that seems confident, put together, or detached to avoid showing their true, more vulnerable self. Impact on relationships. Fear of vulnerability can create significant challenges in relationships. Relationships thrive on emotional connection and authenticity, but fear of vulnerability blocks both. For instance, missed opportunities for connection. When someone is afraid to open up, they miss the chance to form deeper bonds with others. Unmet emotional needs. Without vulnerability, it's difficult for others to understand what someone truly needs or feels, leading to frustration and misunderstandings. Emotional distance. Over time, the lack of openness can create a gap in relationships, making it harder to build trust and intimacy. Even when someone craves connection, their fear of vulnerability can act as a powerful barrier, leaving both them and the people around them feeling disconnected. Why vulnerability is essential. It's important to recognize that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a strength. Being vulnerable means being courageous enough to take emotional risks, even when the outcome is uncertain. It's through vulnerability that people form meaningful connections, gain support, and experience the depth of love and understanding. Brené Brown, a well-known researcher on vulnerability, says, vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, and empathy. Without it, life becomes hollow, lacking the very emotions that make relationships fulfilling. Overcoming the fear of vulnerability. Breaking free from the fear of vulnerability requires intentional effort and self-awareness. Here are some steps to help overcome it. Challenge the fear of judgment. Remind yourself that nobody is perfect, and showing your true self is what fosters authentic relationships. Take small steps. Start by opening up about smaller, less intimidating topics before moving on to deeper emotions. Surround yourself with supportive people. Be around those who make you feel safe and valued, encouraging you to let your guard down. Reframe vulnerability as strength. Remind yourself that being vulnerable isn't about being weak, it's about being brave. Learn from past experiences. Reflect on times when vulnerability led to positive outcomes, and use those moments as motivation to keep trying. Seek professional help. If fear of vulnerability is deeply rooted in past trauma or experiences, therapy can be a valuable tool for healing and growth. The freedom in vulnerability. While fear of vulnerability can feel paralyzing, the truth is that vulnerability brings freedom. It allows people to live authentically, build genuine relationships, and experience the richness of life. Letting go of the fear takes time, but it's worth it. When someone embraces vulnerability, they open the door to deeper connections, greater self-understanding, and a life lived without the weight of constant fear. As the saying goes, vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. And courage, that's where the magic happens. The ego is a powerful force in human behavior. It serves as a sense of self, a protector of pride, and a source of confidence. But it can also act as a barrier to emotional connection. When it comes to relationships, ego often plays a significant role in why someone may crave another person, yet hold themselves back from reaching out. The ego is, at times, both a defense mechanism and an obstacle. Let's break down its dynamics, how it manifests in relationships, and how it can be managed to foster genuine connections. Understanding ego. At its core, the ego is a person's sense of self-worth and identity. It's not inherently negative. It helps us navigate the world, assert ourselves, and maintain personal boundaries. However, when unchecked, the ego can become a source of insecurity, fear, and pride. When someone craves another person but avoids reaching out, their ego might be driving the decision. This behavior stems from an internal conflict. The desire for connection clashes with the ego's need to maintain control and avoid perceived threats to pride or dignity. Why ego creates distance. The ego often acts as a protective shield. Here's why it may hold someone back. Fear of rejection. The ego can't handle the idea of being turned down or ignored. To avoid the sting of rejection, a person might convince themselves it's better to remain silent. Pride and self-preservation. The ego doesn't want to appear weak or overly emotional. Reaching out, especially after a disagreement or vulnerability, can feel like an admission of defeat. The illusion of control. By not reaching out, the ego maintains the illusion of control, framing silence as strength rather than vulnerability. Comparison and competition. The ego might compare one's actions to societal or cultural expectations, believing that making the first move is a sign of desperation or weakness. How ego shows up in relationships. When ego takes the wheel, it creates a variety of behaviors and dynamics that can prevent genuine connection. Stubbornness, a refusal to reach out first, even when they miss someone deeply because they don't want to. Blame shifting. Instead of taking responsibility for their role in a conflict, the ego convinces them it's the other person's fault. Silent treatment. They may use silence as a weapon, thinking it gives them power, when in reality, it creates emotional distance. Defensiveness. The ego makes it hard to admit mistakes or listen to another perspective without feeling personally attacked. The emotional toll of an overactive ego. While the ego protects pride, it also isolates. It prevents people from having honest, heartfelt conversations, keeps them stuck in cycles of overthinking, and can ultimately lead to regret. The emotional toll is heavy. Loneliness, avoiding vulnerability in the name of pride, leaves people feeling disconnected and unfulfilled. Missed opportunities, fear of losing face can cause someone to miss out on love, support, or reconciliation. Regret. In the long run, the ego's decisions often lead to thoughts of what if, or I wish I'd just reached out. How to overcome ego in relationships. Recognizing and managing the ego is key to fostering healthy relationships and breaking the cycle of silence. Here's how to approach it. Practice self-awareness. Take time to reflect on your feelings and motivations. Are you holding back because of genuine reasons or because of pride? Reframe vulnerability as strength. Remind yourself that reaching out or apologizing isn't a sign of weakness, it's an act of courage. Embrace empathy. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. How might they feel waiting for you to make a move? Let go of perfection. The ego often demands perfection, being right, looking strong, avoiding mistakes. But relationships thrive on authenticity, not perfection. Communicate openly. Be honest about your fears and feelings, even if it feels uncomfortable. Transparency helps dissolve ego-driven barriers. Focus on the bigger picture. Ask yourself what matters more, your pride or the relationship. In the grand scheme of things, the connection is usually worth the temporary discomfort of vulnerability. The balance between ego and connection. Ego isn't inherently bad. It helps us set boundaries, establish confidence, and navigate the world. But in relationships, it needs to be balanced with humility and emotional openness. The ability to set aside pride and focus on connection is what separates superficial interactions from deep, meaningful bonds. It's important to remember that relationships aren't competitions. There's no scoreboard, no winner or loser. When someone sets aside their ego and reaches out, they aren't losing, they're choosing growth, connection, and authenticity. Ultimately, love and pride can't occupy the same space. To build genuine relationships, the ego must take a back seat, allowing empathy, understanding, and vulnerability to lead the way. That's when true connection becomes possible. Miscommunication is one of the most common reasons people fail to connect even when feelings are strong. It's a silent disruptor, creating confusion, doubt, and distance in relationships. Miscommunication doesn't always come from a lack of effort. It often stems from people interpreting actions, words, or silence differently. Let's explore why miscommunication happens, how it creates barriers, and what can be done to address it in relationships. The root causes of miscommunication. Miscommunication isn't just about what is said, it's also about what isn't said and how things are interpreted. Here are some common reasons for mixed signals. Different communication styles, people express themselves in different ways. While some are direct and vocal, others rely on actions or subtle cues. This mismatch can lead to misunderstandings. Fear of rejection. Sometimes people hold back their true feelings because they're afraid of being misunderstood or rejected. This withholding of emotions can make the other person feel unloved or ignored. Assumptions. People often fill in the blanks when communication is unclear, leading to assumptions that may not reflect reality. Overthinking. One person may analyze a simple gesture or comment, assigning deeper meaning to something that wasn't intended that way. Unspoken expectations. When people expect others to understand their needs or desires without expressing them, disappointment often follows. How miscommunication creates distance. Miscommunication can damage relationships by creating a cycle of doubt and frustration. Here's how it plays out. Interpreting silence as rejection. If one person doesn't respond immediately or communicate openly, the other might assume they're being ignored or undervalued. Mixed signals. For instance, someone may act distant to protect their feelings, while the other interprets this distance as disinterest or rejection. Emotional overload. When miscommunication happens repeatedly, it leads to frustration, arguments, and feelings of being misunderstood. Erosion of trust. Over time, persistent miscommunication can create a sense of emotional disconnection, making it harder for both parties to trust one another. Examples of miscommunication in relationships. Texting habits. One person might prefer frequent updates throughout the day, while the other sees texting as unnecessary unless something important comes up. The result? One feels neglected, while the other feels overwhelmed. Tone misinterpretation. A comment meant as a joke might come across as dismissive or insensitive if the other person is feeling vulnerable. Body language, crossed arms, lack of eye contact, or even distracted behavior can unintentionally signal disinterest, even if that wasn't the intention. The emotional impact of miscommunication. When miscommunication occurs, it often leads to feelings of confusion, frustration, and hurt. The emotional impact can look like this: self-doubt. One person might question their value or importance in the relationship. Unnecessary conflict, misunderstandings can spiral into arguments over issues that aren't as significant as they seem. Emotional withdrawal. After repeated miscommunication, one or both parties may stop trying, leading to emotional distance. How to address miscommunication. Miscommunication isn't inevitable. It can be addressed with intentional effort and improved communication habits. Here's how. Be clear and direct. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Avoid vague comments or relying on hints. Ask for clarification. If something isn't clear, ask questions instead of making assumptions. A simple "what did you mean by that" can clear up confusion. Use I statements. Express feelings without blaming the other person. For example, say, "I feel hurt when you don't respond," instead of, "You're ignoring me." Practice active listening. Pay attention to what the other person is saying without planning your response. Show them you're fully engaged. Validate emotions. Even if you don't agree with how someone feels, acknowledge their perspective. Say, "I can see why you'd feel that way," instead of dismissing their concerns. Address issues early. Don't let misunderstandings fester. Address them as soon as possible to prevent small issues from escalating. Be patient. Remember that everyone makes mistakes in communication. Give the other person the benefit of the doubt and work together to improve. The importance of empathy in communication. Empathy is the foundation of effective communication. When you approach conversations with a genuine desire to understand the other person, you create an environment where miscommunication is less likely to occur. Empathy involves not just hearing words, but also understanding emotions and intentions behind those words. For example, if someone seems distant, instead of assuming they're upset or uninterested, consider that they might be stressed or overwhelmed. Asking, "Is everything okay?" shows care and opens the door to honest communication. Overcoming the cycle of miscommunication. Breaking the cycle of miscommunication requires a commitment to better understanding and greater transparency. It's about being willing to listen, clarify, and adapt your communication style to meet the needs of the relationship. By addressing miscommunication head-on and striving for clarity and empathy, you can foster deeper connections and ensure that your words and actions reflect your true intentions. After all, clear communication isn't just about talking, it's about understanding. And understanding is the key to building trust and intimacy in any relationship. Emotional baggage is the invisible weight many people carry from their past experiences. It shapes how they view themselves, relationships, and even the possibility of reaching out to someone they deeply crave. This baggage often stems from unresolved issues, heartbreaks, or trauma, and it can act as a powerful barrier to genuine connection. Let's explore what emotional baggage is, how it impacts relationships, and the steps one can take to unpack and move forward. What is emotional baggage? Emotional baggage refers to the unresolved emotions and negative experiences that people carry with them into their present lives. It can include past heartbreaks, pain from previous relationships such as betrayal, abandonment, or rejection, unhealed trauma, experiences that cause deep emotional wounds, whether from childhood, friendships, or romantic relationships. Fear of repeating mistakes, worrying that past failures or conflicts will resurface in new relationships. Negative self-perceptions, beliefs like I'm not good enough or I always mess things up, often formed from earlier experiences. This emotional weight doesn't just stay in the past, it follows people into the present, influencing their actions, choices, and ability to connect with others. How emotional baggage holds people back. When someone craves another person but doesn't reach out, emotional baggage might be the reason. Here's how it can create obstacles. Fear of rejection, past experiences of being rejected can make someone hesitate to open up again. They might think, what if it happens again? Inability to trust if they've been hurt or betrayed before. They may find it hard to believe that this time will be different. Overthinking and self-doubt. Emotional baggage can lead to second-guessing their own worth or whether the other person genuinely cares about them. Avoidance of vulnerability. To avoid the pain they've experienced before, they might choose to protect themselves by staying distant. Comparing the present to the past. If someone reminds them of a past relationship or situation, they might withdraw, fearing history will repeat itself. Signs someone is carrying emotional baggage. Emotional baggage doesn't always show up as obvious behavior, but there are subtle signs that someone is struggling with unresolved feelings. Hot and cold behavior. They crave connection but pull back when things start to get serious. Overreaction to small issues. A small disagreement might trigger an outsized emotional response rooted in past pain. Difficulty expressing emotions. They may find it hard to articulate their feelings or avoid emotional conversations altogether. Holding on to the past, constantly bringing up past relationships, experiences, or mistakes. Even in new situations, the impact of emotional baggage on relationships. Emotional baggage doesn't just affect the person carrying it, it impacts their relationships as well. Here's how. Emotional walls. The person might build walls to protect themselves, which can make it difficult for others to get close to them. Unrealistic expectations. They might expect their partner to fix their pain or prove themselves in ways that are impossible. Miscommunication. Past experiences can color how they interpret actions or words, leading to misunderstandings. Emotional exhaustion. Carrying unresolved emotions can drain energy and enthusiasm, making relationships feel like a challenge rather than a joy. How to overcome emotional baggage. While emotional baggage can feel heavy, it doesn't have to define someone's present or future. Healing and growth are possible with effort and self-awareness. Here's how. Acknowledge the baggage. The first step is recognizing it exists. Denying or ignoring emotional wounds only allows them to fester. Reflect on the past. Take time to identify where the baggage comes from. Journaling or speaking with a trusted friend or therapist can help uncover patterns and triggers. Challenge negative beliefs. Replace self-doubt with affirmations like, I am worthy of love and connection. Practice forgiveness. Let go of resentment toward those who caused pain, as well as self-blame for past mistakes. Forgiveness isn't about condoning actions. It's about freeing yourself from their grip. Take small risks. Start opening up in safe, small ways. Vulnerability might feel uncomfortable at first, but it's necessary for building trust and connection. Seek professional support. Therapy can be an invaluable resource for addressing deep-seated emotional wounds and learning coping mechanisms. Stay present. Focus on the current relationship and individual rather than projecting fears or expectations based on the past. The freedom in letting go. When someone begins to release their emotional baggage, they create space for new experiences and deeper connections. It's a liberating process that allows them to approach relationships with openness and authenticity. By working through unresolved emotions, they no longer have to carry the fear, doubt, or pain of the past. Instead, they can embrace the present with clarity, courage, and a renewed sense of hope. Ultimately, the key to overcoming emotional baggage is realizing that it doesn't have to define them. While the past shapes who they are, it doesn't have to dictate the future. Letting go of emotional weight is an act of self-love, and it's the first step toward building healthy, fulfilling relationships. Vulnerability is the willingness to be open, honest, and emotionally exposed. While it's the foundation for building trust and deep connections in relationships, for many, it's also one of the scariest feelings to embrace. Fear of vulnerability is often why someone might crave another person deeply, yet resist reaching out. It's a protective mechanism rooted in past pain, societal expectations, or the fear of rejection. Let's explore why vulnerability feels so intimidating, how it affects relationships, and ways to overcome this fear. Why vulnerability feels scary. Fear of vulnerability is a natural response to the risks associated with emotional exposure. It's often rooted in these key concerns. Fear of rejection. Opening up and being vulnerable means taking the risk that the other person might not respond positively. The fear of being judged, misunderstood, or rejected can make people hesitant to express their true feelings. Past hurts. If someone has been vulnerable in the past and faced betrayal, criticism, or indifference, they may associate vulnerability with pain and choose to avoid it altogether. Fear of losing control. Vulnerability requires relinquishing control and admitting that you can't predict or control the outcome of a situation, which can feel unsettling. Societal conditioning, cultural and societal norms often encourage people to stay strong or avoid showing emotions, especially for men. This conditioning makes vulnerability seem like a weakness rather than a strength. How fear of vulnerability impacts relationships. When someone avoids vulnerability, it creates emotional walls that prevent genuine connection. Here's how this fear manifests in relationships. Emotional distance. By avoiding vulnerability, they may keep their true feelings hidden, which makes it difficult for the other person to truly understand them. Inconsistent behavior. They may appear hot and cold, showing interest one moment and pulling back the next due to their internal struggle with vulnerability. Surface-level interactions may feel shallow or transactional because they avoid deeper emotional conversations. Unresolved tensions, failing to communicate openly about fears, desires, or insecurities can lead to misunderstandings and unspoken resentment. Missed opportunities for connection. Vulnerability is what allows people to bond on a meaningful level. Without it, relationships often remain unfulfilling. The irony of vulnerability. The irony is that vulnerability, though frightening, is what makes relationships strong and meaningful. When you let someone see the real you, flaws, fears, and all, you create a space for mutual trust and understanding. Vulnerability invites the other person to do the same, strengthening the connection. For example, admitting, "I'm afraid to lose you," or "I really care about you, but I don't know how to express it," might feel risky. but these moments of honesty can transform relationships. They demonstrate courage and authenticity, which often inspire the same in others. Common behaviors stemming from fear of vulnerability. Deflecting or avoiding emotional topics. They may change the subject or make jokes to avoid discussing how they feel. Building walls, creating emotional barriers to protect themselves from potential pain. Perfectionism, trying to appear flawless to avoid criticism or judgment instead of embracing imperfection as part of being human. Overthinking, constantly analyzing their feelings or the other person's behavior without expressing their concerns. Silent suffering, longing for connection but refusing to act on it, staying in a cycle of craving and avoidance. Overcoming fear of vulnerability. Fear of vulnerability doesn't have to control someone's actions. With self-awareness and practice, it's possible to embrace vulnerability and build deeper, more fulfilling relationships. Recognize vulnerability as strength. Society often equates vulnerability with weakness, but it's actually one of the strongest things a person can do. Opening up takes courage. Remind yourself that vulnerability is a sign of emotional maturity and self-confidence. Start small. Vulnerability doesn't have to be all or nothing. Begin with small acts of openness, like sharing a personal story or admitting a fear, and gradually work your way toward deeper conversations. Challenge negative beliefs. Examine the thoughts that keep you from being vulnerable. For instance, if I open up, they'll think I'm weak, can be reframed as, if I open up, they'll see my courage. Focus on trust. Vulnerability is easier when trust exists. Start by building a foundation of trust in the relationship. Pay attention to how the other person responds to small acts of openness before sharing more. Practice self-compassion. Be kind to yourself as you navigate vulnerability. It's okay to feel scared or awkward. It's part of the process. Remind yourself that being human means having fears and insecurities. Embrace imperfection. Let go of the need to be perfect or strong all the time. Allowing others to see your imperfections creates a more authentic connection. Seek support if needed. If fear of vulnerability is deeply rooted in past trauma or painful experiences, therapy can be a helpful space to explore those emotions and develop tools for overcoming them. Why vulnerability is worth it. Though vulnerability feels risky, it's also the gateway to deep and meaningful relationships. It allows you to be seen, heard, and loved for who you truly are, not for a curated version of yourself. Vulnerability invites authenticity, empathy, and mutual understanding into your relationships, turning superficial connections into lasting bonds. In the end, vulnerability isn't about guaranteeing a perfect outcome. It's about giving yourself permission to take emotional risks and trust that the connections you create will be worth it. Choosing vulnerability is choosing growth, connection, and the possibility of love that is genuine and fulfilling. And that's a risk worth taking. When someone craves you but never reaches out, it's rarely a simple matter of disinterest or apathy. Beneath the surface lie complex emotions, unresolved fears, and internal barriers that hold them back. From emotional baggage to fear of rejection, from societal expectations to miscommunication, these factors often intertwine to create hesitation. But here's the truth: connection, trust, and fulfillment in relationships can only be achieved through self-awareness and the courage to face these fears. Vulnerability, though intimidating, is the gateway to authenticity and deeper connections. It's about daring to let go of past wounds, challenging negative beliefs, and embracing the possibility of being understood and loved for who you truly are. For the person struggling to reach out, healing starts within. They must learn to acknowledge and address their emotional barriers, recognizing that vulnerability is not a weakness but a strength. It's only by breaking down these walls that they can create space for meaningful relationships and move forward with confidence. And for those on the other side, patience and empathy are vital. Sometimes a gentle nudge, a safe space, or an open heart can encourage someone to overcome their fears and take that leap. In the end, the courage to connect, despite the risks, allows for the growth of trust, love, and understanding. Relationships thrive when both parties choose openness over fear and connection over hesitation. After all, the heart craves what it craves for a reason, and embracing that truth is the first step towards something truly beautiful.